resonates among the masses, and hence the begging of the question. But I want to read a little bit more from this note, note 171, so that we can further contextualize exactly what Nietzsche is saying. He says the following: the proof of power, this is like halfway through the note of 171, the proof of power, that is, the idea is proved true by its effect, by their fruits, right? As the Bible naively say, as the fruits. What inspires must be true. That for which one sheds one's blood must be true. Why would I shed my blood for this cause if this cause weren't true? Why are so many people within the masses willing to die for their beliefs, religious or otherwise, unless those ideas were true? And if you think about this, this now becomes a little bit more complicated to answer, right? Because of the following. If you are not a theist, if you're an atheist, or you're agnostic, and you're attempting to entertain a discourse with someone who does have religious belief, and they tell you, the reason why I am acting in this manner is because, well, my actions must be justified by some truth. And it's not just me, this whole population of believers acts like I act. And all of us couldn't possibly be acting the way that I'm acting unless there was some truth informing our actions for whatever, religious conquest, proselytization, what you fill in your favorite religiously informed battle, right? So all of us couldn't be wrong in acting similarly. I don't know most of these men and women, but we all ascribe to the same belief. So the belief must be true because we are all acting the same. Well, for someone who doesn't have religious belief, it seems rather obvious, if we look back at note 12b, which I think is one of the most important notes in this whole text. If we look at 12b, it seems rather obvious to say, don't you recognize that the relationship between your idea, right, and the truth, the relationship between the idea and the truth, you say, well, it must be true because the idea has so much effect, right? So that there's this interrelationship between all three, right? The idea is true because it produces this profound effect among all of the masses. The effect is justified by the idea because there is truth informing it, and you flip it any way you want. It seems rather obvious to the non-theist to say, can't you recognize that what's happening here is that we're not focused on the truth? What we've done is we've recognized that ideas have effects. Hence the term ideology, right? An ideology can be completely fabricated. And I'm jumping ahead quite a bit here, but an ideology can be completely fabricated, and we can fabricate an entire ideological system, and we talked about how this was done earlier in acts of genocide and so on. You posit a highest moral standard which no one can participate with, can satisfy. You delineate types of man, and so on and so on and so on. I cooked this up right out of my head. As Nietzsche said in an earlier note, human beings invent these systems. They design these systems. So why is it that we believe that these systems are in any sense connected to truth? So the question becomes an epistemological question, to be technical now, right? How do you know? Again, theist, you need to engage in the discussion, right? How do you know, theist, that your idea is true? You can't tell me because so many people participate in the act that makes it true, right? The connection between the effect and the idea has absolutely no connection to truth, and the example that I was going to give earlier was one of Santa Claus. Among a young infant child population between, let's say, the age of 1 and 4 or 5 years old, 6, maybe something like that, but between 1 and 5 year old, the population of 1 and 5 year olds within at least the United States of America have an idea that Santa Claus is a real person because they see every December 25th presents. Their mom and dad tell them that Santa Claus left the presents for them. And if you were to go and do a poll for, I don't know, that age group, maybe 1 to 5, 1 to 3, and you say, how did you get your gifts? The overwhelming majority of 1 to 5 year olds would say, I got my gifts from Santa Claus. Because all of the 1 and 5 year olds say that they got their gifts from Santa Claus and they believe that, does that make does that create a condition, or does that demonstrate or prove the condition that Santa Claus actually exists? I mean, that's so obviously false. Now that is obviously false. So the point is, it can't be that simplistic, and I'm really not trying to be trite, right? But the idea is to think rationally about the situation. You cannot justify the ontological existence of a thing based on the fact that the idea informs a mass effect among people. That just doesn't jive. It doesn't work at all, right? So there needs to be a response to that, right? There needs to be a sense in which there can be, if there is to be any theological discourse for the 21st century, these concepts need to be addressed. You can't sidestep them, right? How do we come about a notion of the relationship between the ideas, the symbols, and the truth, right? Where is that connection? Okay, and we can't just appeal to the effect. So, again, I apologize if I got a little too deep, a little too early, a little too quickly, but hopefully that made sense. If it wasn't clear, and I get some comments saying that wasn't clear, I'll come back. Maybe in one of these series I'll stop and I'll do like a brief sort of tidy up to make sense of some of these more complicated ideas. I think this one's a little bit more complicated. So that's number two. Hopefully the ghetto example of Santa Claus helped to situate what's going on here, right? What his critique is. Okay, number three. This is also, and I'm just getting really until one believes. Yeah. Okay. So this also is an interesting quote. Number three, quote, that it does not matter whether a thing is true, but only what effect it produces, the idea produces, the absolute lack of intellectual integrity. And I mean, there's obvious lack of integrity here. With respect to the example of Santa Claus, obviously, you want to create a sense of, magic in the world, so you tell your kids the lie. I told my kids the lie. They believed in Santa Claus till about 4 or 5. And then, they started to recognize, well, how is it exactly? And when I saw that they were challenging the narrative of Santa Claus, that's when I told them, no, okay, it's just something we told you so that, you had fun during Christmas. But they now know that, me and Mommy went out and bought all the gifts for them for Christmas. Can you imagine what would happen if my daughter and my son, at that young age, at 4 or 5 years old, started to recognize the inconsistencies in the story of what Santa Claus does and how he goes about doing it, and I were to continually reinforce the narrative of Santa Claus, right? Then it in a sense, and I don't want to jump ahead, in a sense it prevents a part of their reason to develop. They can no longer think using rational deliberation, as we saw. And they start to recognize, I have to sort of keep my rational questions, my critiques quiet. I really shouldn't critique, because every time I critique and I ask why is this the case, I'm reinforced by the dogma that Santa Claus he's real, and he goes around houses that don't even have chimneys in the ghetto where we never get any gifts. And you start to think to yourself, well, that doesn't make any sense, but I'm just going to be quiet, because obviously what I'm doing is, is stirring up some problems, right? So you limit and you prevent the growth, the intellectual growth of a young child at that age, were you, hypothetically, to try and keep reinforcing the narrative of Santa Claus, because now they can't use what they were able to use, and, oh wow, I was able to basically on my own figure out that Santa Claus wasn't, a real existing thing, and use that process in which they came about that truth in the world, if you follow me, as a template for analyzing other things in the world. And that's how it starts, right? You have to train, in a sense, your children with an ability to rationally process information in the world and allow them to organically develop their own process of rational deliberation. That's the distinction between rational deliberation and sort of conformity to the law. If this is rational deliberation, when we get here, some people might go this way, some people might go that way. We all aren't going to make the same decisions, right? We're all not going to act like automatons, right? If the moral law is telling us, then everybody's going to go in the same direction. Everybody's going to go in the same direction. And anybody who chooses